Okay, let's get started. So, hello, Amanda, Nathan, and Daniel, and hello to everybody in the audience. I am your host today. My name is Natalie. I'm part of the marketing team here at CoderPad. Thank you for taking the time to join us as we talk about ChatGPT and technical hiring. My hope is that you'll leave this webinar with a better understanding of what ChatGPT is, how it will impact technical recruitment, and how you can start embracing this technology in your hiring. As you can see on the slide here, after this quick introduction, we'll meet our wonderful panelists. We'll then get stuck into a roundtable style discussion before moving on to a live Q&A session. Now, that's more than enough from me. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our pros. I'm joined today by Amanda Richardson, Nathan Sutter, and Daniel Clout. Guys, do you think you could tell us a little bit about yourselves? Let's start with Amanda, then Daniel, and then Nathan.
Certainly. Hi, Natalie. Thank you for organizing this. My name is Amanda. I'm the CEO of CoderPad. My background, I guess, and training is both in product management, and I have spent a number of years in HR tech, both at CoderPad as well as some other companies in the space. And so passionate about recruiting, and then also hold near and dear technical hiring as a product manager, but also as a proud C++ graduate way back in the day. So I have now indicated that I'm probably the oldest person on the call, but that's okay. Thank you for having us, Natalie.
I'm very happy to have you. Daniel, could you tell us about yourself?
Yes, hi. So again, thanks for having me on today. So I'm Daniel Kloop. I am the founder of Olympia Interview Company. So we're a group of Googlers that does big tech-style interviews and makes it available to startups. My background is, so I was a leadership recruiter for Google Search and one of the recruiters for metaverse research at Meta. Specifically, I was actually focused on ML within metaverse research, and as well as YouTube, Hillary for America. And I too am a software engineer by training, although I have to say I'm a very bad software engineer, so I just stick with recruiting.
Thank you, Daniel. Nathan.
Yeah, my name is Nathan. I'm the VP of Engineering here at CoderPad. I am classically trained as a back-end software engineer. I've tried front-end stuff, was terrible at it, never went back again. I've been building teams for building and hiring engineers for almost 10 years now. So the hiring process is obviously something that I've needed to get right for quite some time. Super passionate about it, and super excited to talk about ChatGPT as it pertains to the whole process. So glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I am very happy to have you. And now that we're all acquainted, let's talk ChatGPT. Amanda, do you think you could get the ball rolling by giving us a layman's explanation of ChatGPT?
Yes, thank you. Well, it's funny. People always say, like, how would you explain ChatGPT to your mom or something? But my mom is actually a software engineer, so it may be not a fair fight. But the best way I thought to describe ChatGPT, it's a language learning model with a chat interface, which doesn't mean much to most people. So I thought I would ask ChatGPT how to describe itself, if that's okay to answer. And ChatGPT told me, I'm ChatGPT, a computer program that can talk to you and answer your questions. Just like how you learn and know things by reading books or asking questions, I've also learned a lot of things by reading books, websites, other information, and I use the information to answer your questions and have a conversation with you. So I think that was actually probably the best answer I could give, and maybe the practical use case for ChatGPT. But think of it as like a huge repository of data, tons of information, not just websites, but books and all sorts of information that's been fed into it. And then it figures out not just how to search and retrieve, but search, retrieve, and evolve based on what you input and based on what others share.
Right. Thank you. That's very clear. Nathan, do you think you could tell us a little bit more about how ChatGPT is being used in the industry?
Yeah, and I mean, as as a software engineer, where my only tool out of school was printed manuals, it is a very evolved version of having a whole bunch of all the manuals you could possibly want and all of the cookbooks you could possibly want on your desk, but in a chatbot, which is awesome. So I think the way that we're seeing this being used by software engineers is really to gather information the same way that they would as if they were going to Google something or go to Stack Overflow and discuss a potential solution to a problem that they're having with a particular framework. My view on it is that it is really automating and collecting a lot of the information that people would be looking for in disparate websites in a way that's just much more efficient. So it's really just a huge efficiency gain for engineers. I'm our team here uses it to really focus on the things that are important in their job, which is solving problems and less about rote memorization of things. So I think that's how we're seeing it used in industry at the moment.
Right. And you were talking about different tools that developers have, ChatGPT now being one of them. How would you say that ChatGPT is different to what developers are used to using already?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the standard toolkit prior to ChatGPT and maybe a couple of other smaller precursors to ChatGPT, was just, Stack Overflow was where everybody went to be like, well, hey, I don't understand how to use this framework, or I'm picking this up for the first time. Please, someone tell me how to use this because I have no idea what I'm doing. So Stack Overflow was a thing, and just pulling together, API documentation from whatever library you were trying to use for the first time. So I guess the tool set prior to having a machine aggregate all of it for you in a chatbot form was really just poking around on the internet, probably starting at Stack Overflow, hoping there's API documentation around somewhere, and then just putting it all together for yourself. So I think it's an evolved version of that, I suppose.
So I guess it saves time, really, just kind of doing the research and for you.
And making really just when I wrote code for pay many moons ago, I would usually do this, and I would create a notebook of all of the things that I found on the internet, and have a wiki of here's my go-to for how to do these particular things, and it's pulled from 4 or 5 or 6 different places, and ChatGPT just does that for you now, which is marvelous.
That makes sense. Daniel, do you think you could give us maybe a fun example or a use case just so that we can have a good idea of how this works?
Yes. So the nature of what we do with at Olympia is to interview candidates and to do it in do these big tech style coding and system design interviews. So I had one of my interviewers, Scott, do both data structure and a system design interview with ChatGPT. And Scott is very much an expert in this area. He's at Google for 14 years as an eng manager, and Microsoft and Facebook as well. And so he put the chatbot through what we would call an L3 interview, so an entry-level software engineering interview. And it was really interesting. So one thing that he found, and this is to Nathan's point, it's like Googling and going into Stack Overflow, but it does it for you. So rather than having to read through all this stuff and spend hours doing it, it does it within a few minutes with just a few simple questions. So it was, it was presenting answers that at times were absolute perfect answers. And Scott said, that would have been a strong hire at Google or Meta or Microsoft. So it was excellent. Problem is, it would just skip immediately to it. And when he would start to press it to explain why, how it got there, how it thought about it, the logic behind it, So what an engineer needs to do effectively, to problem solve, not to memorize stuff, because we have tools already like Stack Overflow and Google to memorize things for us and retrieve that info. It couldn't do that. And about half of the time, it was actually completely wrong. So he said, you have to know enough to know that this is wrong. So you kind of already have to know the right answer to then be able to point out the fact that it was wrong. And then the chatbot would argue with him. And then eventually would just kind of give up and say, well, you need to do research. So as an interview, it was fascinating because it became very clear. And again, like what Nathan and Amanda have just said, it's retrieving information and then it collects the kind of probably I would say like what the modal response is on the internet, the most commonly occurring response on the internet. And it's only as accurate as the internet can be. So as an interview, it really didn't do very well. It failed our basic interview. But again, the interviewer had to be knowledgeable enough to understand that certain answers were completely wrong, and then also be experienced enough to know that certain answers were jumping to the conclusion very quickly without an understanding of the logic behind it.
Right. So it could give you a perfect answer, but then if you start asking questions, it's gonna, on the thought process and on how they got to that answer, then it's gonna struggle and it's gonna start arguing.
Yes, which was interesting. The chatbot arguing.
I've seen people testing, like putting ChatGPT to the test to do a number of things, both in software development and in other domains completely irrelevant to software development. But exactly, like there is quite an argumentative side to ChatGPT if pushed. Yeah, it can kind of get a little bit nervous. So just before I ask this next question that I have for you, Amanda, for those who don't know, at CoderPad, we work with talent acquisition professionals, we work with hiring managers, and generally great companies who are hiring developers. We empower teams around the world to screen and interview engineers with gamified assessments, with take-home projects, and with live paired programming interviews. So what I wanted to ask you, Amanda, is how have our customers been reacting to ChatGPT? What have they been saying and what questions have they been asking?
It's a good question. So I think I would say the general feedback, to just oversimplify for the conversation, has fallen into two buckets, right? I think there's definitely an element of people who are fearful of ChatGPT, either fearful that they'll no longer be able to, their assessment process or their interview process won't hold to find real talent because maybe ChatGPT can trick or emulate enough of an engineer that they'll get through the recruiting process. So that's definitely a fear and a concern. And I would say the second group of people, maybe more in the developer camp, are intrigued, curious, maybe even excited about ChatGPT and want to use it in the interviewing process and want to help make the interview process more efficient and more, maybe even interesting for everybody involved. So, for those that are fearful, I understand that, right? Like it's weird to have the computer talk back to you and even, get angry. I mean, I have little children who argue with me, like, why is the computer now arguing with me? And so I think that is definitely an understanding, but I would encourage those people, and if that resonates with you on this call, spend a lot more time on ChatGPT. It doesn't have to be related to developer hiring. I actually loved Nathan's analogy of, cookbooks. So just think of it as like, hey, ChatGPT, what should I make for dinner? The age-old question. And just start to engage with it more. I think you'll find it's interesting and it is helpful, but it doesn't solve all the problems. And you can quickly see where the gaps are that Daniel talked about. One of my favorite quotes was actually from the CEO of OpenAI, which is, for those who don't know, the software company that creates ChatGPT as they released the model number 4. I'm just going to read it. Someone asked Sam, what do you think of ChatGPT? And he says, it's still flawed, still limited, and it still seems more impressive on first use than it does after you spend more time with it. And I think that's probably the best summary. And look, that's coming from the CEO of the company who created it. So for those who are fearful, I really encourage you to play with it, spend more time, and understand the limitations. And then for the developers often developers, but many who are playing with ChatGPT, including our team, during the interview process, really embrace the ways this can help automate and make your life easier. Think of the rote things that you do all day, whether that's emails to candidate, responses to candidates, summarizing reports, whatever this is. ChatGPT can be really helpful. I was giving a presentation at a conference 2 days ago, and I started, I kind of did my outline, and then I said, ChatGPT, give me a presentation that's 12 slides on technical interviewing. And it was actually decent. I mean, it didn't have all the data, but it was like enough of a jumping off point. And I think, really finding a way to embrace the tool, even in technical interviewing, right? Like, how can you use ChatGPT to make the candidate use it? Ask the questions that Daniel wanted to ask of ChatGPT. Like, why is this the right answer? Why is this the wrong answer? How is this code good? How is this code bad? What if I change this piece of context? Like, really use it to push the conversation forward and understand how candidates can use or are intrigued by new technology and want to use the tooling to be faster, more efficient developers. So I think that's kind of a longer summary of two different camps of responses that we're seeing in the world.
Yes, thank you. I think what I've seen in our team in any case is I think there's like an initial fear, but I would agree that getting into it and testing and playing with it, it really does just sort of give you an idea of what it can do, where its flaws are. And like for me, obviously I don't code, but I do work in marketing, and there's a massive creative side to what we do. And I feel like ChatGPT, it's so exciting. It's like you have to be creative with it and be excited about it and embrace it and see what it can do for you. So we've talked a little bit about how recruiters and how developers or hiring managers are feeling about ChatGPT. Nathan, did you have anything to add on how maybe your team or developers within your network, how they've been feeling about ChatGPT?
I mean, it's been similar, right? Whenever something new comes around that threatens to automate jobs away, which is always how these conversations start. People feel fearful, but like just as everybody's been saying, the more you play with it, the more you realize that there's some pretty significant limitations, and it's not particularly good with context or follow-up in a lot of cases. So I think once you get in there and realize, oh, this is just a great way to automate like a lot of the data collection that I'm doing to figure out how to do my job well, or figure out how to solve problems as an engineer, and realize that it's not like something that you're going to be able to sit in a seat and write code to deploy to production today. It's all those fears pretty much go away, and then everybody embraces it. So I think just coming out of a day of brainstorming with the team here, I think everybody is extraordinarily excited about the potential of both using ChatGPT on the job, and then how it pertains to the products and interviewing and all of that stuff. So I don't think there's a single developer on the team here that is not super excited or using it actively, or some combination of both. And it's obviously actively encouraged on the team. So that's sort of where we are.
Great, thank you. Daniel, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add on maybe the experience that your interviewers have had, or even sort of the feedback from candidates?
Yeah, I mean, candidates, I think don't quite know how to use it yet. And of course, being interviewed, like CoderPad and Olympia being interview companies, I don't think that they would want to talk to us too much about it. But for the interviewers, I can say this. I have a feeling, because interviewers are ultimately also engineers, so I have a feeling that this is one of the same. The interviewers look at it and say, this is something that once we understand how it can be used as a tool, so not as something to automate humans, but as a tool, then yes, let's integrate that in and see how we, if and how we can use that to our advantage in an interview, because that's real world, right? And an interview should always reflect the real world. But something that I've been kind of pointing out is, at any point that a machine can replace a candidate in the interview, like can actually, answer the questions, at that point, the candidate themselves and the job itself is obsolete. because the interviewer is really just trying to replicate, themselves to get another headcount in to be able to replicate that workload. So once that workload can be done by machine, then you have no need to even interview the candidate. So in terms of cheating and things like that, I think it may actually help us. I mean, certainly we are running all of our questions now through ChatGPT. What we couldn't have done before is to sit for hours going through Stack Overflow and figure out what either a cheating candidate or more common, just a very well-prepared candidate, what they know from reading Stack Overflow. Well, now we know very quickly because we can see really what the sum response is coming from the internet. So it actually helps us to detect cheating. It's kind of like how the dark web actually helped the police catch criminals. So I think it has the same effect. But I do have to kind of somewhat germane to this. I don't want to go on a tangent about it, but what Nathan brought up about automating humans and how people worry about this, there's actually something in the opposite direction that we're trying to figure out, which is what happened with Internet 1.0 with things like Wix and Squarespace, where they really kind of took something that was crafted, and once the process and everything was figured out, they basically did what Ford did and made it into like a factory setting so that they can then mass produce websites. So Internet 1.0 did have a big revolution. It was absolutely not AI, it was opposite direction. It was taking a chaotic environment and making it a systemic environment and making it a system. We're seeing that now with Web 2.0, where a lot of the web apps that previously took a lot of engineering work are now being done by platforms, and it's getting so good that it's becoming unjustifiable to hire engineers to do run-of-the-mill web apps. That's going to be a thing, and I don't know how to handle it. I don't know what that looks like, but it's going to be a big change. And I think engineers are going to have to adjust. Our interviews, as the roles adjust, are going to have to become very different. When I was in metaverse research, so I was mostly working on computer vision there. Well, not working on, but recruiting for computer vision. There was some NLP though, like this. Internet 3.0 is going to be kind of a pairing of AI technologies together with probably AR, maybe VR, something like that, but kind of three-dimensional plus artificial intelligence coming together, the way Internet 2.0 was mobile technology and, the internet, more powerful internet. Anyway, the point being, these technologies might be, AI technologies might be very impactful in 10, 20 years with Internet 3.0. But for right now, I think the opposite's going to happen, that we're moving into not chatbots making web apps, but actually platforms in a factory kind of setting producing web apps. That is going to be highly disruptive. And I'm actually a bit more worried about that than I am artificial intelligence when it comes to what we're doing.
Okay. Daniel, sorry, can I just jump in? I love that point. And I think you went quickly through something that I think you understand very well, but I think is important for the audience. Like, you talked about how if you can automate the screen, you've basically automated the role. Can you double down a little bit on that and like what that actually means for the interviewing process? I think one of the questions I get from people is like, but ChatGPT can pass the LSATs, the SATs, the bar exam, whatever it is. Like, how can it possibly pass whatever the highest level, CS AP exam is, and yet not be able to be a developer? Like, people are having trouble reconciling that. Can you talk through a little bit more about how that happens and how you detect that in interviewing?
Yeah, and so I was thinking about this a lot, and I won't give away too much, but I've seen a lot of really fascinating technologies with YouTube search, and then of course with metaverse research, and there are huge technologies coming down the line that will be different from chat. It'll be huge technologies. And I think what everyone is finding is once you develop an AI program, that program, unlike all 8 billion of us supercomputer humans, where we all have these different experiences, an AI program is ultimately, effectively, it's one thing, right? It's one personality, one experience, very intelligent, but it can't approach the world in novel ways. And once we start to scale things up, we often see that a certain flaw becomes catastrophic because it's not, it's not different machines, it's the same machine being cloned. And it cannot approach novel problems. And I hate to pull up like the 737 MAX problem, but we kind of see that in other areas as well, where one thing suddenly becomes catastrophic because the machine, has this flaw. So when it comes to novel things, logic, true problem solving, making something cutting edge, that's what an engineer's job fundamentally is. Engineers are not here to just be, production line workers, pumping out
code monkeys.
Yeah, not supposed to be code monkeys. They're supposed to be problem solvers, novel problems, really fixing things that exist in the world that have no solution. Well, as of right now, no AI technology is even, as far as I'm aware, it's not even remotely in the universe of being able to approach that. It can only summarize, like I said, the modal response. So it takes the most common thing that we humans do, and it can repeat that. Once something is outside of that, or if we need something that hasn't ever existed, these programs really fail at it. And so from an interview perspective, maybe it says something about SATs, right? Like maybe it says something about standardized
Absolutely.
tests. I think it says something about, it probably says something more about these norms that we have in how we assess people, rather than the machine itself.
Yep. Yeah, because just because you pass the bar exam doesn't mean you can argue a case in court, right? Like there's back and forth, there's logic. You have to apply an argument to a new situation. ChatGPT is going to be like, does not exist, does not exist. What did ChatGPT tell you to do, Daniel? Go get more research after it got mad.
After we already knew the right answer and said, no, that's wrong, got mad. And then it's like, well, go look it up.
That's what I'm doing.
And we're here. But I think that that is the point. And so I think your point actually about standardized tests is also right? Like this means that as a community of people who care passionately about recruiting and assessing developer talent and making sure that the right talent, the right people with the right skills are getting the right jobs, like figuring out how you can evolve your interviewing process to not be just like, here's an exam, spit it back, you got an 82, you're hired, you got a 37, you're not. Like actually being thoughtful in your interviewing process and making it much more of an engaging dialogue and asking the questions is what I think the call to action is for all of us.
Learning experience. If it can pass your interview, you need to fix your interview process. Okay?
I think there's so many interesting things we were talking about. I feel like we're talking about ChatGPT, but also like tons of other technologies and possibilities. I think like we could talk about that forever. But just to sort of recenter the conversation on ChatGPT specifically, Amanda, you were saying it's kind of a way to like reevaluate your interview process, your screening process. Would you say that's sort of this critical reevaluation? Would you say that's the main way that ChatGPT is going to change tech hiring, or are there anything else you can think of that realistically ChatGPT will change?
I mean, I think it'll have a couple of impacts, right? I think ChatGPT is forcing everybody to relook at their interview process, right? If your interview process for a developer involves effectively sending a standardized test, getting the result back, and you're done, like I think ChatGPT could pass your interview process and you probably need to reevaluate that. How would I evolve that process? I would make it a dialogue, right? Maybe you even have the candidate complete the assessment with ChatGPT, send it back to you, and then spend an hour in a technical interview talking about, is this right? Is this wrong? How would you have done this better? Like, how did you work through this? Was this the first answer ChatGPT gave you, or did you have to work through it? I mean, ChatGPT is effectively a junior developer in some ways, right? And so like, how are you coaching up and describing with a junior developer? So I think it does force you to reevaluate your interview process. I think the other interesting thing is to leverage how candidates use technology, right? Like, ideally, I think we're, as a development community, we're ultimately creative beings. We're trying to solve problems. We're looking for new tooling. And so how can you embrace those tools and make that part of your interview process, right? Like, it's not cheating. In fact, I like high five every developer on our team who will use ChatGPT to be more efficient. That's great. Developer efficiency
what
is a
we
key
want.
metric for most companies. So like test for that in the interview process. And then I think the recruiters, again, I said this a little bit earlier, but I think should think about how this can help automate some of their more mundane tasks in a day, whether that's not legal documents, though there are companies working on AI for legal documents, which I am super excited about as someone who spends a lot of money on lawyers, but separately, using it for rejection emails, whatever it is, like, framing a conversation, like best questions to ask, whatever, use ChatGPT to make your life easier. So that's how I think it'll ultimately change hiring.
Right.
I mean, just to jump in here really quick, I think you made a really interesting point about how this is forcing people to reevaluate how they've been evaluating candidates, right? Because if something that is really good at speaking languages and aggregating information can pass your interview process, you're probably not looking for the right signal, right? And I think, like, honestly, like, I'm excited that it's sort of forcing everybody to take a look back at, like, what are you actually looking for in the interview process, and then rethinking, the entire, interview funnel as a result of that. So I think that'll be a net positive, to be honest with you. And I think everybody, in industry will have to deal with that. So.
Right. Thank you. And I wanted to come back to something that you were saying, Daniel. You were saying that you've been asking ChatGPT all of your interview questions or all of your screening questions, and sort of using that as a base or as a starting point to be thinking, okay, well, this is what they could come up with the internet, ChatGPT, whatever. How can we build on that? How can we dig into that? Is there anything else that you have changed or that you see yourself changing in your process?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we've talked about it a lot. It's actually an incredibly powerful tool. So I think, yes, we've talked about the excitement that everyone has had may be misplaced because they're excited that we have a machine that can basically pass the Turing test, which is really cool. That is really cool. That novelty will wear off. Where I think that this is going to be fascinating is how we can use it as a tool. Right now, I am concerned about the accuracy of it. And if a candidate is using it in an interview, that might be, that's, we're trying to think this through. I don't know yet, but
right.
We may be doing an interview, like one of our interviews might be with open book, right? With ChatGPT or however the candidate chooses to do open book, because these tools are going to give us the ability to retrieve so much information so quickly, and engineers really always want to be moving away from memorization, as much as possible, and get better at retrieval. So it's like doing something rather than remembering something. Right. So this is going to be fascinating. And in an interview, we always want interviews to emulate sitting down in a meeting with a teammate. So you should always think about an interview like that. Two teammates sitting together solving a problem. And ChatGPT very much will be part of that. I think maybe where it'll almost be like a skill set is, how does the candidate navigate that to also use it correctly, which maybe is a bigger skill here. When the internet is giving us half the information is incorrect and ChatGPT doesn't have a way of knowing that, how can the candidate use their human judgment, experience, and logic to know this is the wrong answer, and then fix that. And then once they do get the right answer, and it's the most advanced answer ever, okay, cool. Well, we have 45 minutes. So if you're in a meeting and you're trying to solve a problem, let's solve the problem even better. And that's going to be a skill set. Yeah, I think it's probably for us, it might be as simple as allowing ChatGPT to be used in an interview. Maybe not all of them, but maybe starting with one interview, and just seeing how the candidate navigates it. A real world setting that is very real world.
Daniel,
right.
I love that. I think one of the questions we get a lot as a company is like, so does this mean the end of assessments? Like, are assessments dead? Like, now it's only live interviews. What does this mean? But I think like that's a very good example of how assessments are not dead. How are you evolving your assessment process to either be open book and embrace ChatGPT? And I would also posit that I think all the excitement and talk on this call is wonderful. And I love to see the attendance on this, but from like a data perspective, we're not really seeing the proliferation maybe yet. But I think this is one of those things where, okay, so maybe a portion of candidates will now get through, but then can they actually get a better answer? And actually, Nathan, I would love to hear, like, as the developer who's doing a number of technical interviews, like, how would you, evolve assessments in the era of ChatGPT? Like, what would you do for that asynchronous portion?
I mean, yeah, so for the asynchronous portion, I think, and we're talking a lot internally about this, right? I think it's interesting because what you don't want to do is revert to something that is so far out of a good asynchronous question for somebody just because ChatGPT can't solve it, right? So I think there's some interesting things to do, and I've always been a fan of when you've got something up front that is a screen for candidates for a variety of different reasons. Coming from the perspective of whatever the next step is in the interview, we need to have something to add on to this. This does a couple of different things. I mean, first, right, it allows you to get to a point where a candidate actually has to defend whatever solution they have live, which is if they are cheating in any way, shape, or form, right? Whether it's from ChatGPT, whether it's from a friend did their homework for them, right? Whether it's copying and pasting from Stack Overflow, you will really, really quickly see that someone doesn't really understand what they submitted, right? So, I mean, what I've always done over the years before any assessment products were even on the market was make sure that you've got something that's early, whether it's a take home, whether it's a screening test, whether it's in whatever form it comes in, that really is built upon in the next stage of the interview. So I think that's the way I've always looked at it. It's the way I would encourage everyone to look at it. And honestly, once you get farther down that rabbit hole, it's going to be easier to pick out people who cheat anyway, right? Because they're going to have no clue what they submitted in the first place, which, I don't know, that's sort of exciting.
Right. I think so. We've been talking a lot about how talent acquisition recruiters, how they can embrace the technology, how moving forward they can use it to their advantage. I feel like what I'm hearing in any case is that ask yourself what skills you really want to evaluate. Maybe not focus on trying to make screening questions that ChatGPT won't be able to answer, but actually making assessments that will evaluate the skills that you're looking for, whether that's problem solving skills, like that's the thought process that you're looking for, that's the creativity that you're looking for, or the collaboration skills, or whatever that might be, as well as the sort of technical hard skills that you're looking for. We've talked about automating more mundane tasks that are also part of your job, like emails, I think we mentioned, follow-ups, that kind of thing. And we've also talked about building on an assessment, an interview, making sure that you have a discussion and that it's collaborative and that it's sort of pair programming. It's two people sitting down and coding together. So I think that's lots of really great tips and advice. I was wondering if any of you had anything else that you wanted our audience to walk away with, like if they wanted to learn more about ChatGPT, or if they wanted to kind of get brainstorming or thinking about how it could help them in their day-to-day jobs, what would you say? I don't know if anybody wants to raise their hand for this one.
I actually have a thought on that. So we've been talking about assessment in terms of our engineers getting interviewed, which makes sense. That's what we do. But for recruiters, so I think there was a pre-submitted question that touched on how recruiters could use this. And so I was looking around because I remember this is going to be adopted, by, of course, Microsoft. So Microsoft Azure, I'm assuming, is going to have an API eventually, probably. And then Google has an equally powerful, NLP program. It was called Lambda. They're renaming it something else, but that's going to be on Google Cloud. So you're going to start to see actual apps independent of Google and Microsoft that will have technology. One of them that I can imagine is going to happen real quick is when you're doing something like going through LinkedIn and sourcing, and we know that we get a higher response rate if we personalize a message. I think that's going to happen. I haven't found anything yet, but I'm sure it'll happen. But one thing that I've always realized about as a recruiter is it's very hard to actually automate our job, our connection with a human being, and that's like the sales element of our job. It's the caring human part. People empathize with us when we're nice and when we try really hard for them and we treat them like they're special and do really actual genuine things for them that are special and unique. So the candidates react to that, and the empathy that we get back is one of the most important things in closing a candidate. It's just any kind of sales job. You really want to build empathy and make them feel like you, the human being, doesn't want to be let down as a person. And because it does affect us, right? And they sense that. So when you're going through writing an email, I don't think that anybody really cares that you have personalized it. I think what they care about is that a robot hasn't messaged them, and instead a human being took out 2 minutes of time to invest in them, which is like a signal that, that they are special and they're not just part of like a big, huge, like they're not a cattle herd. Right. So that's, with ChatGPT, I think people will sense this really quickly, and we're going to have to figure out how to get around that to show someone on a message that we do care about them and we're not treating them like cattle and we're investing time in them. I don't know what that's going to look like. It's very top of mind for me. So it'd be interesting to, for anyone else to share if they're figuring something out. But yeah, I mean, the empathy part of this as a recruiter, I don't think we're going to be able to cheat that, but I do think this is going to mimic it, and we're going to have to find a different way to show empathy and build empathy with a candidate as a recruiter and as a good salesperson.
Right. I mean, I think ChatGPT is getting very good at mimicking sort of a human way of talking. So yeah, the challenge is going to be other ways to prove that you're a real person, that you're a human being, and that you're putting time into this candidate. I was going to say, so it's not herding cattle. I was going to say, and if people think you're treating them like cattle, or if they think you're a machine, they're much more likely to ghost you. I mean, I think that's something that a lot of recruiters have in the hiring process. So now I've got this great image of like a cattle ghost. So yeah, anyway.
We all, you know what, I've always said, whenever you sense that you're talking to a robot, we all turn into sociopaths. Like we are sociopaths to robots. I mean, that's one of the problems with robots. It's very hard to get around that.
Right. You have there's like no heart, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna ghost you, talk not very nicely to you. I don't care, you're a robot. So yeah, definitely I think empathy is still and will always be a huge part of the job. I think we are going to move on to our Q&A session. We have received so many questions. Thank you so much to everybody for taking part, for submitting your questions. I will say now that any questions we don't have time to answer, we'll try and answer asynchronously. But let's get into it. So some of the questions we've received have been, I think this is a quite a common fear, something that we see floating around the internet. It's the fear of ChatGPT or other AI tools replacing developers at work. So I have a question from Francis, which is, will this tool replace developers at work? And then I tie that in with another question from Mohammed, which is, why is there this fear of AI taking people's jobs? Yeah, why are people having that sort of fear, that initial worry?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on both of those. So why do people have that worry? I think honestly, it is something that comes up every couple of years when improvements in tooling happen. I think, Daniel, this is, going back 30 minutes now, you made the example of, things are getting automated, right? I don't know, like it was very, very common when e-commerce was new on the internet. Every e-commerce site had to have a team to build all of their e-commerce stuff. What do you see now? Like everybody using, I don't know of any e-commerce site that is not legacy that doesn't use something off the shelf at this point, right? So I think it's a fear that comes up all the time. Like whenever you're talking about, quote unquote, replacing somebody's job, everybody's always going to be fearful of that, at least initially. And at least my experience over the years is that goes away as people understand, like, oh no, this, you're just going to be working on something that's actually more interesting and less rote, and that we can just, use building blocks to automate. In the case of e-commerce, that's what's happened. And what was the second question, Natalie?
So it was, will it replace our jobs, and why do people have this fear?
Okay, so I think the why is natural, right? Whenever something comes along to remove a function or automate a function, everybody's going to be fearful of that for forever. And then will it replace people? What ChatGPT is really good at doing is coming up with information on the internet, aggregating it, and presenting it to you in a way that can be used. What it can't do, and I will make a bet and say won't ever do in our lifetimes, is be able to, hey, can you tell me how to spin up for example, a version of MongoDB that is sharded in this way, specifically at CoderPad to integrate with everything else and deploy it to production, right? The part that is special and that needs human touch is that last part, right? Context. And there is, it's context, it's nuance, it's historical context about why things were built a particular way. It is care as it regards to use cases that aren't documented particularly well in the business. It is human touch with people who have been around here for a long time that know why things were done a particular way and why we can or can't build things a particular way. So even in the case of junior engineers, I would never think it would be able to replace them. Personally, I feel super strongly about that, and I think that's a good way to think about it, at least with the the context that ChatGPT can give you, and then the things that are just you need to be somewhere and feel around and get a lot more information that is specific to the company that you're at to do your job. To be honest with you.
Right. Thank you for that. I'm just looking through, and we've had a question on hiring bias. So Wade says, with ChatGPT developing so quickly, are there tools being developed to offset possible hiring bias that the technology may unexpectedly cause?
That is a great question. Yeah, I don't know of anything yet, but I think, to Daniel's point earlier around, if you can just roll with me for a minute, right? If what the iPhone and the app stores created was this whole new world in which you had the ability to create apps on top of, if AI is one of those platforms now, and so maybe there is the opportunity, maybe it's a data set that you train on, maybe it's a particular set of information that you're trying to educate the models are, because all the models, I mean, if you think of a big pile of papers, like they're all a function of whatever papers are in the model, and you can try to get them as wide as you want, but they're looking for the modal, the most common response, and it's based on that. So I think there's probably really interesting opportunities, and it may even not even be an AI solution. There may be companies, company that comes to mind, I think, is Grammarly. I think has features around mitigating bias. There was another plugin whose name is escaping me. But I think that's probably a very interesting frontier to explore, but I know of nothing right now. I would also remind us, I think one of the things we sometimes get mad at I get mad at the robots about is that they're not perfect, right? They're not always right. They have bias, but then we forget that actually humans are often not right. Really not perfect, and have a huge amount of bias. I mean, study after study, I was citing the other day, a study out of Harvard, where just taking the resume and changing the name of the candidate from a African-American name to a white name increased your chance of callback. That's it. Like, got your resume, going to call you, you're qualified for the job, 3x just by changing the name. So I think humans are fundamentally flawed as well. And so how can we use the tooling to maybe even fix the biases that the humans have, not just the biases that the machines have, and be very cognizant of how these machines are being built. And I know this is a very hot topic, how the machines are being built and what is being used to, in AI, pick the right answer, for lack of a better word, and what that means. I mean, that's something to be aware of, because it will be, GPT-4 is one of many piles of these learning models. Google's now got one, everybody's got one. Some of them are public, some of them are not. Like, you're now going to have to be cognizant of what data set you're using to find your answers.
And I guess that all the efforts that we're making to mitigate bias in the recruitment process already, I guess all of those efforts need to apply to any tools that we're using, be it ChatGPT or anything else.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Daniel, I'm just being a little bit conscious of time. Did you want to add to that question, or shall we move on to another one?
Well, actually, because it's such an important thing, I feel like we didn't touch on it. So let me just add something. So
Go ahead.
I mean, we can calibrate, at least with these algorithms, we can calibrate them, whereas we just can't calibrate society. So as we see problems coming up with bias, we can calibrate it. It might be like an and rather than an or, where we can identify human bias, like especially in interviews, because figuring out bias in interviews is difficult. So I could see one of these tools in the future being very good at that. That would be wonderful. But also, like, even really good interviews themselves are really trying to figure out if somebody has future potential. And one thing that I know that a previous team had found at Google, and I thought was really interesting, reading resumes is effectively like an institutional bias. You're bringing it in. So people that have experience already, so you're just sort of like, propagating all the previous bias in society with education and everything else. You carry that on by focusing too much on experience and resumes. That's why experience-based interviews are not very good interviews. And Google proved this time and time again. You have to have hypothetical problem-solving interviews related to the job, because you're looking at future skills. And if you look for somebody based on experience and that's how you're interviewing, there's going to be a lot of bias that comes in because of the way the world works. So yeah, I mean, that's something to remember about good interviews, looking at novel problems. Also, maybe these tools are going to help us just review the interview feedback notes that everyone's writing and just see if we do detect something that's a little bit biased, or if there's a trend going on with a certain interviewer that could help us.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what Amanda was saying about actually, instead of introducing bias, helping us to identify bias and to mitigate bias. I think that's really interesting. We got a couple of questions around cheating, or as one of our participants called it, cheat GPTing. I quite like that.
That's good.
So yeah, people in the audience are wondering how screening, interviewing tools like CoderPad could pick up, detect the use of ChatGPT or potential cheating. How do we do that? How could we do that? And would you recommend that people do try and identify that?
I think at a tactical level, so one of the features I'm most proud of is our playback feature, right? So you have your IDE, you ask a question, you write, somewhere between 6 and hopefully 100 lines of code, not more. And then when you play it back, you can see if someone copies and pastes 80 lines of code, something happened. Now, it may be that they felt more comfortable in their own machine and they wanted to use it there. It may be that they found the answer on Stack Overflow. It may be that they pulled Stack Overflow and something out of ChatGPT worked it into something commingled and came up with the answer. So I think, yes, you should count on your tools to be able to see large copy paste. Like, that's a red flag. But I would caution us that all copy paste doesn't imply cheating. And a lack of copy paste doesn't also imply cheating. I think this is where, like Nathan's point earlier around, like, take what you do in that assessment step and build it into your later process. Just ask somebody why. And, to frame it in a real world example, right? If you had a marketer, right, and you need to write a 4-paragraph piece on whatever, and you could play back what they worked, you could see that as you built out that page, you would like add, subtract, like that's right. The kind of motion you're looking for, is you can see how someone thinks through. Code is the same way. And so how do you think about, or how do you understand that person's thinking as you look through playback? And then, assuming you're satisfied with their end result, when you get into the interview, ask them, like, why'd you pick that way? There's a lot of ways to, solve a problem. Why this one?
Right. I mean, apart from me, I work in marketing, and if I write something, I just write it all off the bat. And
it's perfect the first time.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And it's done in 3 minutes. No problem.
No problem.
and maybe one counterintuitive way to look at this, right? Let's just say a candidate comes in ask ChatGPT how to solve the problem, copies and pastes it in. They don't know really anything about it, but they can still do well on follow-up questions with, hey, can you dig into this and tell me how you understand this? You're still trying to assess them for their problem-solving skills as it pertains to the solution that they provided. And that's good enough signal, right? If they can explain their way through and build upon a solution that was maybe initially provided by, not them, I personally don't see a problem, right?
Why
Like
not?
if they're still problem solving through it, then fantastic.
Right. We've also had, we're very close to time, so I think this will be the last question. But we've had some questions around how CoderPad approaches ChatGPT compared to other screening interview tools. Would anybody like to raise their hand? Maybe Nathan, Amanda, for that one.
I'll bite. I mean, look, I'm always reticent to speak for the other products that are out there. There are certainly there are many solutions. This is a highly competitive space, and I know we have to earn your trust every day. And I'm also cognizant that there are a lot of approaches to different problems. And so what I guess I would say, rather than saying what others are doing, let's talk about what we're doing. And I would say our approach is to, rather than take it from a place of fear and banning ChatGPT, I hope what you heard us talk about were ways to both embrace ChatGPT, use it as a way to test developer efficiency, developer thinking, certainly understand what it can and can't do and how you can build that into your recruiting process. But ultimately, I will tell you, if you gave me a tool that would make my dev team 40% more efficient, I would spend millions of dollars on that. So I think our approach is how can you embrace it? How can you be smart about it? And I think I'll let our competitors speak for themselves, but I think leaning into technology and leaning into evolution is kind of both what we do as technologists as well as where the world should be going.
Right. We are at time. So
I want to talk so much more.
I know.
I have so many more questions for Daniel.
I know. It's a shame. I think an hour has gone by in no time. Thank you so much to each of you and to everybody who's joined us. I know we didn't have time to answer all of your questions, so we will get to them asynchronously. We'll either publish an article or something like that, but we'll get some answers to you. Round 2 next week. Well, I'm not sure about that, but maybe we will need a round 2. In any case, thank you all so much. You will definitely get a replay. This was all recorded and we will send that to you. So yes, wonderful. Thank you. Everybody have a great day, evening, whatever time it is for you, and happy hiring, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.